Hey, this is John McKechnie, and welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, we are going to be breaking down the NFL Combine. It kicks off next week on March 1st. We're going to run through some fantasy-relevant prospects that are going to be participating, and we're going to break down what we're looking for from the events in Indianapolis. Let's start the show. Welcome into the RotoWire NFL podcast, joined as always by Mario Puig, or at least I think I am. Mario seems to have dropped for just a second. Mario, do I have you back?
Yeah, sorry about that. My screen died.
Oh, no, all good there. So if you're watching, that's how the sausage is made. But anyway, this is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at WinBet. Mario, how are you doing on this Friday?
Oh, I'm fine. Snowed a lot here, so that's mostly what I'm thinking about. What about you?
All good. It's been an exciting week for me personally.
Award-winning uh, podcast host, radio host, and writer, editor,
I wear a
John.
lot of hats. That's all you can really say about that. I have a big hat collection. But yeah, that was exciting stuff. When we pushed I was looking forward to doing the pod yesterday to just kind of distract myself because they were announcing it like right around the time that we were going to be finishing up, usually on Thursday. So I was like looking for that as a distraction, but I was, had to just kind of like
Yeah,
train
that was
myself
my
to
fault.
not look at Twitter too much.
I managed to destroy my internet right when we were about to broadcast, so I tried again before this show apparently too, but the computer survived.
There we go. Excellent. Well, why don't we go ahead and dive in here? So the combine kicks off, like I said at the top of the show, on Tuesday. We're going to have the quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. They will be working out on Thursday, March 3rd. The running backs will be working out on Friday. So a lot of good stuff to kind of finish out your work week next week. But let's kick things off with the quarterbacks. A lot is constantly being made of the perceived lack of top end talent at the quarterback position in this draft. It seems like after Senior Bowl week, Malik Willis is in the driver's seat to be the first quarterback off the board in a couple of months here. But beyond him, and we'll start with him actually, and move on to some other quarterbacks that you're looking out for. But what is Willis? What can he do in your mind to kind of further solidify his status as that QB1 in this class?
Well, it'd be good if he could run and jump well at the combine, and ideally be more than something like 218, ideally 225 or something like that. If his frame could somehow fit it on, he's only like 6'1", I guess, so
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to be as heavy as a guy who's 6'3" or 6'4". But if he can just have a dense build for his height, then also run really good numbers with the 40. I guess those agility drills are worth something too. I don't mean to make it sound like it's only the 40 that counts, but I do like to see that one be good, and some combination of standout testing. I tend to look at things like if a guy is very fast and also and has poor agility testing or whatever, then I'm willing to look over it and just kind of say like, even if he isn't exactly quick, the standout speed stands out enough that I can overlook it. And
The
also, I think
Metcalf corollary.
yeah, and when a guy has a really good 40 time or any particular number, and then bad testing otherwise, it's also a case like that where you would sooner wonder, did he just have a bad day testing? I mean, what are the odds that this guy who is so fast apparently can't run in a diagonal line or something? Like, it's just, especially when you're on the field where there aren't cones and you don't have a stopwatch, and it's just you evade people. It's like usually the standout athletic trait, whatever it is enough to carry them a little bit, especially if they're well built. So yeah, I would like to see, with that said, Willis test well in as many things as possible, because his rushing detail is crucial for the NFL. And I dismissed Willis too quickly previously, just because some of his passing numbers and tape at Liberty were really, really brutal. But with Josh Allen having really brutal tape at Wyoming and really brutal numbers at Wyoming, but still turning out to be an NFL star, it showed how an exception to that rule can occur. And best as we can tell, or best I can tell with Allen, the way the exception occurred with him is having, top 99th percentile tools, the arm strength and the running ability to just threaten vertically with the arm and threaten underneath with the running ability. And also, to be fair to Allen, bad as he was at Wyoming, he had a bad offensive line, especially that last year after like Tanner Gentry and
Oh,
Robert
sure.
Herron were gone. Then he was really left with some bums there. So Willis might have had something similar to that at Liberty. Like, the one thing I'll say is Conference USA or wherever Liberty plays does not have defenses like the Mountain West did back when Allen was there. So it's not quite as quick of an excuse. But
Yeah, they played, I believe, like the weakest schedule on balance this year because they're an independent, and they just
independent. Oh man.
yeah. So they don't. I think their only Power Five games this year were like Syracuse and Ole Miss, if I remember right. Like everything else was kind of cakewalky.
Yeah, and even with that being the case, Liberty got sacked 52 times in 13 games last year. So this is if there was one thing in particular that I was missing with Willis all that time, it was the degree to which he was effective as a runner. Because when you adjust his stats for the NCAA, adding carry attempts for each sack and subtracting the yardage distance of each sack from his rushing yardage total, it looks like Willis was basically averaging right under 100 yards game per rush. 100 yards rushing per game, and about at least 8 yards a carry. So if you look now, it'll say 4.5 yards per carry because they subtracted the sack yardage. But if you count the stats the way the NFL will, he probably averaged more like 8 yards a carry, even with pretty big volume. And particularly if Willis tests really well at the combine with his running and jumping, even from day one in the NFL, he might be like the second most dangerous runner at quarterback after Lamar Jackson, which that's not enough to necessarily make him a good starting quarterback in the NFL. But if a bad passer is going to succeed in the NFL at quarterback, being anywhere near Lamar Jackson as a runner is a good start.
Yeah, I think you have that absolutely nailed. As far as Willis, and like you said, the standout trait with him, that athleticism. He's also got a very good arm, from what
Yeah,
I've seen.
and people
So
seem to love him. I guess part of his ascent at the Senior Bowl wasn't even necessarily so much the play on the field. It was just like the coaches, players working with him were like, kind of like the Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson thing, where just guys are like, hey, I want him on my side.
yeah, so that's obviously a good mark in his favor as well. When you look at who tends to come next in a lot of rankings and mocks, the tier with Sam Howell, Kenny Pickett, and so on. How do you see that Matt Corral? How do you see those guys kind of separating themselves this coming week?
So I don't think I was wrong to dismiss Matt Corral because he does not have quite the frame and the tools
He's
that Willis.
he's too skinny. Like he's
Right.
he's
Yeah.
6'2". He's barely over 200 pounds, and I mean, I love it about him. It's one of my favorite things, his fearlessness and his toughness. But that's just not. It's not going to help him in the NFL when he's just getting lit up by even bigger guys than he was during his time at Ole Miss. And I mean, he played banged up a lot this past season. His ankle got tweaked in like October, and he played through it for the most part, and played in that Sugar Bowl. Obviously, got injured in that one, and that was an unfortunate way for his college career to end. But yeah, I'm just concerned that Corral's kind of got like the Taylor Heineke stuntman type of aesthetic going on, and but he's even less compact than like Heineke's 6 foot, but like a little bit heavier.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, I don't want to like anything, and I certainly hope he does well, but I'm concerned for Corral falling out of the first 3 rounds. Like, I don't see why he would go anywhere really. Like, I
Mm.
mean, 5th round is where I think a guy like him usually goes. So we'll see. It's like if Malik Willis is the next Josh Allen case, then I would sooner guess Matt Corral is the next Brett Smith than like some other kind of Like specifically, I'm naming him not just to name drop Wyoming quarterbacks on you, but like Brett
You're
Smith was
always
a really
welcome
good.
to.
Yeah, Brett Smith was a really good college quarterback, and at the time, I knew a lot less than I do now, and I was like, oh, he might be like a top 40 pick or something, and a lot of draft Twitter was hopeful for Brett Smith back then, but he measured in at like 6'2", 204 or something like that, and he didn't have the cannon arm, and Corral, I'll guess say, is probably stronger armed and certainly faster than Brett Smith was, but not having the NFL frame was really held against him, and turned out to be a big deal because I feel like he actually played in like the CFL or something and wasn't very good either.
Mm.
So Corral is kind of just a prospect to me. I don't see what's obviously better about him as a prospect than even a guy like Felipe Franks last year. And obviously they're total opposites in terms of build, but I just mean to say like guy who's a totally good, SEC starter, whose calling card is athleticism, who you can't project to even be an average passer in the NFL. It's like, if I'm going into that particular bin, I would rather have Franks in the 6th or whatever than Coral anytime before that.
Okay. All right.
Corral,
So
sorry.
good to set the record straight on
I like
him.
Coral more. I wish we could call him that.
And it makes sense. He's like a California kid, by the beach, but we digress. So beyond Coral, do you like Sam Howell at all? Is there anything that you think he could do this coming week? And then I want to hear your thoughts on Carson Strong and maybe someone who's a little bit more flying under the radar right now.
Yeah, so I guess I should have said Howell I won't count out, but it's tough for me to see him working in the NFL. I feel like he really thrived on chaos a lot at North Carolina, even when he had that pretty loaded offense around him. And he was still good without those guys. I mean, if we're going to penalize Howell for having, De'Ami Brown and Dez Newsome, Javonte Williams, and Michael Carter, then I guess we also have to give him credit when he didn't have those guys. And he was still a totally, totally good college quarterback. So he's that at the very least. Like he was a really great player for the Tar Heels. But when I watch him play, and maybe this is too flimsy of a basis to evaluate him, but I just feel like I'm watching like a worse version of Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M. And as much as Manziel probably failed for his issues, personality wise, character wise, he also was not anywhere near the NFL level that he was at college. In college he was killing Goliath daily, and
Mm-hmm.
then in the NFL is like, sorry, you needed to. When the league gets bigger and faster, and you don't have anything else to offset that, you just kind of lose something. You just become a lesser relative player. With Howell, I feel like I don't see as much speed. He seems like a little smaller than Menzel. Doesn't have probably as good of tools in any respect. Wasn't as productive. So I see him as like a worth like a justifiable I don't know, second round pick or something. And I know he might go in the first anyway, and got to give him a chance, I guess. But if he goes in the first round, I definitely worry about him being like, I don't know, Cade McNown category of quarterback or something, where it's just like, hey, he was great in college, I guess, whatever. But being short and not having a strong arm and not being truly fast, it's like that stuff tends to drag you down, and when you make the jump to the NFL.
He kind of reminds me of like a lesser version of Baker Mayfield.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always kind of thought like a
I think
little
he's
bit
probably a little
more.
more athletic, right? Like he's probably faster.
I think so. And Howell's
Worse arm though.
a little bit bigger, but probably not as good. But like that sort of kind of compact, squat type of
Yeah,
quarterback
yeah.
that can whip it around pretty decently. So that they kind of remind me of each other. And if that's what we're looking at, 4 years into Baker Mayfield's career, I don't think that he's going to be afforded the same opportunities that Mayfield was as the number one overall pick, former Heisman Trophy winner. But I think that Howell could end up being like a fringe decent starter, but I'm not
Yeah.
expecting a ton more than that from him necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with that. So whereas I don't want to count out Howell, I think I do want to count out Pickett. And the absolute best case scenario for Pickett, in my opinion, is something like Jeff Garcia, basically, where Garcia was a good quarterback or a viable starter for the 49ers anyway, but like they also had Terrell Owens there, and like they had some other decent players. I can't remember, but
J.J. Stokes, was that a guy?
yeah, he was picked in '95. I guess he might have been hanging around that long. But in any case, yeah, it's Garcia was undrafted out of San Jose State and played in the CFL before he got a shot in the NFL. But Kenny Pickett kind of ran that same circuit, playing 5 years in the NCAA. So he had 4 full years at Pittsburgh. Sorry, the first year was not a full year. He played like 3 games. And they might have called that a red shirt, even without COVID. I can't remember, but
yeah, he beat Miami the day after Thanksgiving in his first game, and I remember seeing that. And Miami was really good that year. They were fighting for a playoff spot, and it was like, dang, this kid might have some moxie. I like this. And then I went into the next year, and he was bad. And then the next year, bad.
So yeah, he was bad for 3 full seasons, and I'm not saying he was less than great, or he was just kind of up and down. I mean, he had 2 good games a year for 3 years, and the 2 good games were always against like Akron or something, or just the bad ACC defense that year, whichever one it was. And it wasn't for a lack of help, like he had Maurice French was a good college receiver, especially the 6-year breakout for Pickett. He had a lot of help in that Pittsburgh offense. I mean,
the Blitnikoff Award winner.
Yeah, that receiver is really good. And even so, like this most recent season, I know it's going to tempt people. They're going to be tempted to say, "Oh, it's just like Joe Burrow." Mm-hmm. Joe Burrow was non-indicative for a couple seasons, and then he had a decent season, and then he had the best season ever. He didn't have 3 bad seasons and then the best season ever. He and Pickett did not have the best season ever in his best season. So there are magnitudes of difference for me. The other thing is this hands detail with Kenny Pickett. That's not just gibberish. This concern that people raise, like that's a real concern, and it's a couple things. It's the smaller your hands are trying to hold a football, the lower the temperature gets, the worse everything gets. Like and not just that, rain too. It's like you have any kind of precipitation, it really helps to be able to wrap your hand around the ball. Because if you're trying to just make everything about grip strength, it's like things can negate your grip strength. Like the cold will make the ball harder and heavier, and the rain will reduce the amount of friction you can create with your strength. So like he can't just, stress ball his way past this problem. He might be able to do that thing in China where they break people's legs and then space the bones apart and then they grow back like a half an inch taller. Maybe he could do that with his like pinky and his thumb, and maybe that would fix it. But anything else won't. And those first 4 years, he was fumbling constantly. So in addition to you worry about the throwing falling off, especially when it gets colder and especially when there's precipitation. Even the wind, you worry about how the ball comes out of your hand, and the wind, it can kind of throw off your velocity, even if you got a strong arm otherwise. But the fumbles were always a problem with him. And in the NFL, even if let's just say Kenny Pickett is a average passer in the NFL, but I mean like top 20 NFL passing quarterback. And he's a good runner at the very least. Like we can assume that much with him. Like he's not near Willis. But Pickett, I don't know, he should be able to run like at least better than Zach Wilson or somebody like that. Like, he should be like a 400, 500 yard runner in the NFL and with decent efficiency. But I think if he plays a full season as starter, he will set the record for the most fumbles in an NFL season. Like especially with these 17 game seasons, like he could fumble 20 times in a season. I don't know what the record is, but he can definitely do it. I'm skeptical that he'll play long enough to get to that point, but if he does start a whole year, 20 fumbles.
Put it in the books. Yeah, so that obviously is one of those things that there's going to be like the initial pushback where it's like, oh, you're just getting too hung up on the hand size. It's like, no, like it's a legitimate problem.
Also, Joe Burrow didn't have 8.5-inch hands.
Right. Yeah. People said that he was on the smaller end. It was like 9.25 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, Pickett. Yeah. And,
did you see that thing? He was like refusing to get his hands measured at the Senior Bowl because they're like, I got to do a special stretch. Maybe he's doing that Chinese bone breaking therapy.
Or the lawyer from Always Sunny, who put on the big hands in the courtroom, and then he went to point and it went flying off. Nobody look!
Can you put your hands over my hands for this picture?
That guy, all-time character.
Love that guy. Not what he
um,
did. I don't love what he did. Just love the
no,
character.
he's
Yeah.
very funny. Any other quarterbacks you want to get to before we move on over to running
Oh,
backs?
Carson Strong. I tend to skip him when we're talking about this stuff for fantasy because he might somehow find a way to have negative rushing yardage even in the NFL.
Can't move.
Yeah, he
No.
has. Yeah, he took some sacks. He's got like negative 150 every year at Nevada. He might be able to throw. I don't know. Like I'm much more open to Carson Strong being an NFL viable passer than Pickett, probably even Howell. Not much more than Howell, but more than Howell, and much more than Pickett, much more than Corral. So Carson Strong might be the best like pocket quarterback in this class. I'm open to it, but he's one that I have trouble figuring out too.
Yeah, I watched a couple of his games yesterday, and I've been paying attention to him for a long time. He's been on my
Yeah.
radar. But the footwork. I'm not a quarterback guru or anything like that, but his footwork. He relies on his arm a lot because the footwork gets real sloppy. But a lot of the time, the arm is enough for the ball to get there. So it might not be the biggest concern. He might have one of the better arms in this class, but that is still something that. Whereas he can muscle a ball to the sideline against a Mountain West corner, maybe that's going back the other way in the NFL. So that is something that I do have a little bit of reservations with him on. And maybe I'm just rooting for this to happen more than anything else. But I want Bailey Zappi to kind of
Oh,
put himself into the conversation. The production absurd. He
yeah.
starts his career at Houston Baptist, goes to basically Western Kentucky acquired the Houston Baptist offense and system for this past year, and it resulted in Zappi throwing the most touchdowns of all time in a single season. So he's not a tall guy. He's like 6 foot. I'm gonna guess is what he's gonna come in at. A little bit over 200 pounds, but he can throw it and he knows what to do. I mean, there were times when I was watching him where he knew how to manipulate a defender with his eyes, and then move the safety with his eyes, and then deliver a really nice deep shot. So I'm keeping an eye on him as like kind of my sleeper guy that can make some headway this next week.
Yeah, I'm rooting for him. His arm does look pretty weak, and therefore I'm worried that he might be another Fromm case. But uh, if you spread the field for him, I don't know. It's like his production was pretty crazy, and yeah, I don't want to count him out exactly.
Yeah, so we're Bailey Zappi fans. Let's see here. Before we move on over to running back, got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. And we also got a message from our friends over at WinBet. WinBet is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. WinBet brings you all the latest action with the user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WinBet's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WinBet is currently available in 9 states as Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WinBet, the possibilities are limitless. Register for WinBet today. Make a qualifying deposit and wager to receive $200 in free bets. Promotion may vary by state. Download WinBet now. It's WYNNBET. WinBet, the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. All right, Mario. So let's move on over to the running backs. I think it's pretty consensus that Brees Hall and Kenneth Walker are, in some combination, most people's top 2 running backs
Do you
in
have
this
Spiller
class.
with them?
Say again?
Do you have Spiller with them?
Oh yeah, I get it's I don't like Spiller quite as much as other people. I understand why people do like him, but I mean, I didn't feel like he was even the best running back on his team this past year. I'm a
Yeah.
huge Devin
So
A-Chain guy.
yeah, he's one that I've had trouble figuring out because I've seen, like you said, I've seen some people who are like really high on him, and I don't quite see it, but I'm like, oh, maybe I missed something. I feel like Walker is pretty simple. Like uh, there is a bit of a question for his pass catching, but I think it's important to note that it's uh, incomplete, like non-applicable, rather than a negative. Because like you see some people saying that he's a bad pass catcher, he's tripping up some red flag for not catching enough passes at Michigan State, but he was a workhorse player and highly successful as a workhorse runner. If he had only been doing like 15 carries a game instead of 22, 23, and he still wasn't doing anything as a pass catcher, that's when I would worry. But he did everything that he physically could, everything more importantly that they asked of him. And in both the cases of Wake Forest and Michigan State, well, in Wake Forest, he might have had fewer receptions than that what's his name guy, the guy who ran ahead of him for a year. But at Michigan State, he led the backfield in receptions. So in that case, it's pretty clear. Like he did everything he was supposed to as a runner, and there just wasn't much pass catching to do. So that he didn't do it doesn't mean anything. And it's a big distinction from a case like Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones, every single year at USC, had someone at running back catch more passes than him, even as a starter. So it would have been one thing if Kenneth Walker, caught 10 passes this year and some backup of his caught 20. Like Ronald Jones had guys like Stephen Carr catching more passes than him, even when he was, running for all that yardage. So Walker does need to test well. If he's a slow running back, he isn't anything more than a rotational player in the NFL to me. But if he has the speed to turn corners and split safeties the same ways that he did at Michigan State, I'm pretty bought in at that point.
Yeah, I agree. So he definitely can solidify himself. There's a lot on the line for him, for sure. I haven't really heard your Brees Hall take. I don't think is it just something that you don't need to think too much about. It's pretty
I
clear
just
what
can't
he
really
is, or?
do more right now because like he checks the boxes for sure, big time for production, including as a pass catcher. And his frame is great for NFL starting running back. So he just needs to not like he just needs to test better than someone like Jeremy Hill, basically. And I'm fully on board with him as a 3-down player in the NFL.
Yeah. So he's pretty cut and dry. Let's talk about Tyler Algiere. I think that he's someone that could certainly, I think a couple of people out there have a good feel on him and are expecting big things, but I don't think it's caught on. Kind of in terms of the consensus just yet. But I think that there's a chance after this time a week from now, a week from today, Friday, that he is put himself in that top 5 running back discussion in this class, if not better.
Yeah, so I remember that post you showed me, people thinking he's going to run like a 4.65 or something. That's totally possible, and I don't know how fast he is. I'm waiting on the combine for a guy like him. But if he tests pretty well, and by that I mean if he's like 220 pounds and he runs a 4.64, that's not great. But if he has strong broad jump, ideally a bit of a vertical agility drills, I'm willing to look past that if he's over a certain weight. And if he is both over that weight and runs like a 4.56 or something like that, and has the really good jumps, the broad jump, I'm pretty interested in for a player like him. Then I'm going to be pretty interested because his production was outrageous at BYU, and he was outrageous without Zach Wilson too. So it wasn't just like
Even better.
he wasn't just looking. It wasn't like he wasn't like one of those Nevada guys in the Colin Kaepernick offense, Like it wasn't quite like that. It was like he just took over the offense when Zach Wilson left. So when a guy runs away from the defense as many times as he did, I'm very interested. And granted, he still needs to test a certain way, but even a guy like LeGarrette Blount, like he tested really badly, more or less, and he still was a big play runner in the NFL. Like before he was a goal line back at the end of his career, he was making big plays as a rookie with the Buccaneers, So Algiere could be that kind of guy where people overlook him because they just write him off as like a, too slow or just some kind of system product or something. But he really might just know how to run because he sure ran away from a lot of people at BYU.
Yeah, I mean, notching, I think, over 20 rushing touchdowns this past year, like that's no joke.
His rushing yardage was his rushing average was very high, even with obscene touchdown frequency. And with that many touchdowns, it's like, imagine how many more yards he would have added if there wasn't like the end zone to end the play.
Exactly. So yeah, keeping a big eye out for him. A couple of smaller backs that don't profile as those 3-down guys, but have some pass catching ability that I'm interested to see how they do next week. That's James Cook and Jarian Ealy. Your thoughts on those guys?
I'm not familiar with Ealy yet. If Cook can measure in over 200 pounds and still test well, that would be huge for him because as much as he didn't really produce all that much in college. He definitely produces a pass catcher, and that much you can take for granted. And if he has a frame and athletic profile that's vaguely NFL viable, then it's pretty easy to say, just like, okay, well, get him in a specialist role, and we'll see what happens after that. And you have reason to believe he'll be a good player in that capacity at the very least. If he's only 190 and he doesn't test very, very well, then I get concerned. But the skill set as a pass catcher is definitely there. And I guess he could maybe give you more as like a split out kind of pass catcher than some of these other guys might be good pass catchers, but they probably can't run split out.
Yeah, I mean, some of Georgia's most explosive plays this year came with Cook being split out. If you watch his game against Tennessee, he was kind of taking that game over on the Georgia offensive side, at least. That's when the offense started to really make a move in that game. He had the 67-yard run against Alabama as well. Kind of ran out of gas at the end of that one, and Bama's guys are pretty fast for their own part too. But still picked up 67 on that run. So I think he's got explosiveness. I think he's got really good pass catching ability. Like you said, we need to get him, over 200 pounds to really think that it's possible that he gets into the day two range. But otherwise, I'm expecting him to probably be like a 4th or 5th round guy at this stage.
Deep sleeper, I'm kind of interested in. I don't know if he got a combine invite, but Treston Ebner at Baylor had a very weird career.
Yeah, he'll be there.
Okay, so yeah, he had a very weird career, but he was really good as a pass catcher, so it'll be kind of interesting to see if he gets more of a look from the NFL than he did at Baylor. He'll have to test well for that to happen.
Right. So keep an eye for him. I like Kevin Harris as well. He didn't really play much this past year. Had a back issue that I think was just kind of a nagging problem for him.
Forgive me, I don't know who this is.
Okay, he's South Carolina's running back. I guess they have two because they've got Zaquandre White in this combine as well. But 2 years ago, if you look at the 2020 numbers for Kevin Harris, really, really impressive. So he profiles as one of those like power backs in this class. Like that, there are a handful of power backs that I like, whether it's Kevin Harris. I think Hassan Haskins might profile as one of those. And I think Zamir White, another guy to look at if you're thinking just pure power back type of guys. But Kevin Harris listed at 5'10", 220. In 2020, averaged 6.2 yards per carry over 185 carries. That's a pretty significant workload. Had 15 touchdowns. Also caught 21 of 28 passes or targets for 159 yards. So nothing crazy. But.
I don't like the Alabama one. That's the only.
Brian Robinson.
No. Yeah, I don't really like him.
No, I don't think Brian.
Just
Brian
like AJ
Robinson,
Blue or something like that, or was it Alfred or AJ? Alfred. Yeah, Alfred Blue.
Yeah. So yeah, not in on Robinson. He was fine. He's a bit over
backup in the NFL, but that's about it.
I think so as well. But anything else on the running backs before we move on over to receivers?
I hope Ronnie Rivers does well. But yeah, he's a tiny guy, probably not doing much.
Yeah, but I did always like Rivers during his time at Fresno State. All right, so let's get to maybe the most important position for fantasy in this class. That's receiver. So stop me if you've heard this one before, but we've got another great receiver class. Of course, we've just been spoiled over these last couple of years. I don't think that there's a Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle type necessarily that's going in the top 10, but I think that there's still probably 5 viable first-round receivers.
Yeah, last year's class was insane at the top, especially Chase and Waddle. Like I think we're both huge Waddle fans. We consider him very rare talent. I think you can be very high on Treylon Burks, Drake London, a bunch of these guys, and still say like they're not quite, certainly not approaching Chase and probably not approaching Waddle either. But Burks is really interesting because he compares very conventionally to AJ Brown, in terms of just being very high level producer in college and having pushing 230, running under a 4.5. If you're that kind of athlete and you produce the way he did in college, you don't really even need to think about it that much at a certain point. Like it would be great if he's also an otherworldly route runner, sure, but he probably doesn't need to be. He wins by running away from people who can't tackle him. And that's if he tests a certain way, as long as he tests a certain way, that's just kind of an easy evaluation for me. Drake London could conventionally project very similarly to Mike Evans. He's definitely got the production down, the frame, But what we don't know is, can London run like that? Because Evans was not expected to be particularly athletic back at his combine. It was kind of a surprise how great he did. He ran a 4.53 at something like 230 pounds. That's really hard to do. London is also not that heavy. Like he might, if he bulks up, he might come in at like 220, 225 or something. And if he
Mhm.
does, he'll still be hard pressed to run a 4.53. But if he does, I mean, London's production is just so automatic. Like he's it's something that you miss if you only look at the volume. But if you look at how old he was, and also like he was distracted with basketball early in his career too, and he still
Yep.
just kind of like easily got onto the field. So he probably has a lot of skill that isn't necessarily easy to see on tape, because if he didn't, and especially if he's not a standout athlete too, if he didn't have rare skill as a receiver, the way he produced would just have not have been possible. It's out of the question. You can't do it. You can't just make a guy who isn't a standout talent produce like that. So very high on those two, and very high on Jameson Williams. Like, I've thought about it more and talked to some people, and like they think he runs like a 4.35 at worst when healthy. So for me,
Yeah.
like, okay, you produce like that, you run a 4.35, shut the book, it's over.
He's crazy. I mean, such a game breaker. I don't think anyone really foresaw his 2021 coming. I mean, a lot of people were trying to really say like John Mechie's the next great Alabama receiver, and people, maybe myself included, had like a couple of their freshmen who we saw in the national championship game after Williams and Mechie were hurt. I thought that they were going to be better going in than Jameson Williams, because he was just, some guy that couldn't get on the field at Ohio State. Not that you can really hold that against him, given what
It's
Ohio
kind of
State had a
yeah, it's kind of like
receiver.
the Auburn running backs 10 years ago or whatever, where it's like we get Brandon Jacobs transfers to Southern Illinois
Hmm.
because you have Carnell Williams and Ronnie Brown and everything. But yeah, Ohio State having Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Jameson Williams and whoever else they had in recent
Jackson
years.
Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, man, like it's a case where you say like, okay, clearly the fact that he didn't earn playing time doesn't matter, because like basically no
Yeah.
one on earth could have.
Yep. So that's not a mark against him. I guess the only real question is, how much does he get penalized for having torn his ACL in January? Because that's brutal timing. Just
So
about as bad as it gets.
if he were in London's position, I'd be a lot more concerned. And by that I mean, if Jameson Williams were a 6'4", 210 guy who didn't separate a lot in college, like Drake London didn't really separate. I don't care. I think if anything, he thrives. It's like if you try to lock him up, you just lose. So I think that suits London. And if London tests poorly, like if we had a non-applicable grade for London's 40 time, that would be more concerning to me. But we have the 4.35 kind of reports around Jameson Williams. Like we have reason to believe they already know how fast he is, and if that's not a question, then I don't know what question there is anymore. Like there's the possibility, I guess, that his knee has like the worst luck of all time, but ACL tears don't matter that much, and especially in a player his age, doesn't matter that much. For all we know, he could be ready for week one. I mean, I don't know if it's not a slam dunk, I guess, or anything like close, but you should draft him wherever he would have normally gone, in my opinion. And I think he's going to be like a top 20 pick, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's a top 15.
So, but I was talking to you and some other people, in a football chat, and I saw him get mocked to the Chargers at 17. I would
That'd be
love
sick.
that fit because
Yeah, that'd
we
be
talked
sick.
about it all season long. They had no speed this past year.
They could have. Tyron Johnson really would have been productive for them this year, even if he just ran post routes and fly routes and literally not a third kind of route. Because a couple of those times, eventually, the defense would have just left one guy on him, and they can't run as fast as him, and then it's a wrap. But Jalen
Hmm.
Guyton gets locked up all the time, and he for some reason can't get open, even though he knows the playbook so great. It's like whatever. Jameson Williams, in any case, they'd need to put him on the field if they drafted him, and it would be impossible to screw it up from that point.
Yeah. So that would be awesome. But we'll keep an eye there. Obviously, he's not really going to be able to work out this coming week, but
basically, Jameson Williams might be what people wanted Henry Ruggs to be. Not just that, he would be Henry Ruggs without the psychotic off-field behavior. I mean, like, he could be kind of that close to that fast and an actually like standout skilled route runner, everything. Like, he could be a big time player. Like, I don't know, like maybe like a Torrey Holt kind of player. I don't know what the best kind of comparison would be. Like, I'm really, really high on Jameson Williams.
He's incredible. I mean, I think there's good chances that national championship game might go a little bit differently if he doesn't get hurt, because he got hurt on a play where he torched the Georgia defense.
Yeah, I made the Georgia corners, who are pretty good, look not that fast,
Yeah, just running past Keely Ringo and Darian Kendrick. But we digress. Any other receivers that you're looking for from this group? Like I feel like you've had a take brewing. You've had it in the hangar. You're tinkering with it. What's the deal with your Ohio State receivers?
Yeah, I think they're both good, and I kind of expect both to go in the first round. But basically, Garrett Wilson right now, I think, is emerging as the consensus wide receiver 1 for most draft media. And that's crazy to me. I think he's good, but I don't think there's any basis to rank him alongside Burks and London. And, of course, Williams I have ranked 3rd, too. I think Chris Olave is going to be my wide receiver 4, and Garrett Wilson my wide receiver 5 going into the combine. Now, if Olave tests poorly and Wilson, as expected, tears it up, like we expect Wilson to tear up the combine, whatever happens, that's like almost a given. The issue for me is that people are specifically ranking him ahead of Chris Olave, and they're ranking him ahead of Chris Olave while ranking Olave like wide receiver 4 through 6 or something like that. And at the very least, I feel like if Garrett Wilson's the wide receiver 1, then there's a really good case for Olave as the wide receiver 2, because he was the better player at Ohio State. And I know people don't agree with that. The closest you could come to saying Garrett Wilson was a better player than Olave at Ohio State is to say, like, he was in the last, like, 6 games of 2021, which I don't 6 games when there are 36 to look at. So, 30 anyway, given COVID and whatever the hell else. So Chris Olave was the number 1 receiver for Ohio State as a true sophomore when he would have just turned probably like 19. And at the time, they had the super seniors KJ Hill. They had Benjamin Victor. They were both super seniors. And then the 4th receiver that year was Garrett Wilson. And Garrett Wilson did a good job that year, but he didn't run ahead of any of those 3. Chris Olave ran ahead of the seniors. And Garrett Wilson, I think a lot of people confuse themselves by looking at early entrant status for Garrett Wilson. They give him in their models a bonus for being an early entrant, and they penalize Olave for being a 4th-year player and not declaring early. But Olave is only 3 weeks older than Garrett Wilson. Normally, when you're talking different classes like that, you're talking a year plus, at the very least, like 6 months. 3 weeks is not different to me. They're the same age, basically.
Yeah.
So if Chris Olave is the same age and he's running as the wide receiver 1 while Garrett Wilson is running as the wide receiver 4, that to me means Garrett Wilson needs to do quite a bit better from that point than Olave to get the benefit of the doubt of being better than Olave. And I think in the meantime, a lot of the people who are so high on Wilson are just getting caught up in yards after the catch and highlight tapes, basically. And you watch Olave, he just dusts corners, and then he catches the ball at the sideline or in the end zone or wherever, and he doesn't really do cool after the catch Kadarius Toney stuff. And I think people are holding that against him when they shouldn't. You shouldn't hold it against a player when they dominate and make it look easy. And that's not to say you should penalize Wilson, but it's not a basis for putting Wilson ahead of him. And I think that's very specifically what's happening with a lot of people. That and Olave having just like a somewhat quieter senior season than the prior 2 years. But he's been very great. He's been great in all of the last 3 years, and he scores touchdowns at a rapid rate. I think Olave, as long as he tests well, is – I don't know. I think he's better than Rashad Bateman last year, and I think it's almost a little bit like Justin Jefferson with Olave, where people look at how easily he's putting up these big numbers and then say, like, oh, he must be, like, slow or, like, he's just not electrifying. And it's like, maybe it's just easy for him.
He is like a really smooth player out there. So yeah, he doesn't have the kind of crazy highlights like a Wilson. Wilson, I think, was a bigger recruit too. I think he was like a 5-star.
He's really good though. I want to make clear, I'm not trying to bash Wilson, but to me, he's more like a Brandon Ayuk kind of player, where he's clearly being effective because he's such a good athlete, and maybe he can sharpen some of his game, sharpen his skill set to catch up with Olave. But to me, if Olave is like, 90% of the athlete that Garrett Wilson is, then Olave is the better player, even with Wilson still being obviously very good himself.
Okay. All right. That's a good case being made there. Any other receivers that you wanted to touch on before we get out of here?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good ones. I think just to race through the list of my favorites, I'm curious to see the other guys in this list. George Pickens, he could jump into my top tier actually. There's George Pickens, Jahan Dotson at Penn State. I think there's a good chance he's better than KJ Hamler, even though no one cares as much because he's not as specifically fast. Justin Ross at Clemson. Trying to remember if there's anybody else. I'm sure. Oh, David Bell. I would like to see test pretty well, and if he does, he's also in that conversation. But yeah, there's like 9 players that I feel like could be first round picks at receiver this year, and then there's only like 3 or 4 guys that I can confidently predict in day 2. Otherwise, so there might be a bit of a cliff after that really strong initial group.
Yeah, I think Sky Moore from Western Michigan seems to be getting a good.
I like him
and
Khalil Shakir.
Yes, like him. There's Romeo Dobbs. There's Jalen Tolbert. So there's a
I even like the Coastal Carolina one too. The Javon Haley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's interesting players, and the combine's so helpful for helping us figure out where specifically and what order they go. Because right now we're just like, oh, these guys were all really good college players, and knowing who's actually what weight and how fast and how much they jump, everything like that, will be helpful in solidifying, the final rankings.
I hope Wan'Dale Robinson does well.
Oh, I love him. I meant to mention him. I think I am super, super convinced about him. I don't want to say like first rounder, but I really think we shouldn't rule it out, because if he tests really well, what could you possibly criticize him for? So productive.
I think maybe the size. That would be about it. But
right, he's listed at 5'11", so as long as he's not like 5'9" and 160, I'm totally on board.
Yeah, and I don't think he's that. He's played some running back, so he definitely has like a more dense build. I wish that Jareth Stearns was bigger, but alas.
Him and Calvin Austin are a little tiny bit interesting, but I'm not on the Austin bandwagon. That started up a little bit during Shrine Week, and I just don't see it. I mean, he's interesting, but I don't see anything with him that like Jakeem Grant didn't do at Texas Tech,
Yeah, and Grant's still in the NFL, but he's not a guy that you're seeing catch a lot of targets every single week, that type of thing. That's going to round it out. Next week we'll be giving some updates as the combine workouts are progressing, so look forward to that one. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, brought to you by our friends over at WinBet. From Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/